Welcome to Oscar Launch as we begin step one of the annual plum pudding. Now, plum pudding is one of those traditions associated with Christmas from time immemorial. Actually, went back to at least the Tudor times, and in those days, plum puddings were actually made with plums. Over time, the meaning of plum began to mean raisins, more or less, or any dried fruit. So it was sort of a generic term for dried fruit by about the 17th century. So in plum pudding, actually in this recipe, there are some prunes, so some dried plums. And so I guess we can actually call it plum pudding. And plum pudding isn't, in the North American sense, a pudding at all. It's more of a cake, a Christmas cake. Those of you who are familiar with fruit cakes probably will see that the process or the ingredients are very much the same. Process is a little different actually, because plum pudding is steamed, fruit cakes typically are baked. But they have a lot of the same spices, a lot of the same dried fruits as well. So in this first step, what we're going to be doing is mixing our dried fruit and put them in a bowl with some sherry, and we're going to let them steep for a few days before we actually make the batter and steam the pudding. So I'm going to begin with about 1.25 cups of currants, 1 cup of pitted prunes, which I've chopped. So chop them up. Oops, they're very sticky. And 1 cup of golden raisins. And so you're going to mix them up, stir them up, as they say. Typically, English puddings for Christmas, plum puddings, are begun on Stir-Up Sunday. Probably most of you have no idea what I mean by Stir-Up Sunday. In the Anglican Book of Common Prayer, the Sunday next before Advent has an opening prayer, a collect, and it starts with these words, "Stir up, we beseech thee, O Lord." And so I guess from that opening prayer, we are reminded it's time to stir up our Christmas puddings and start to get them underway, because that will give us about 6 weeks before actually Christmas Day, when we're going to be eating the Christmas pudding. So we're going to mix the fruits with about 3/4 cup of sherry. Let's be generous with our sherry. Don't want to be mean. So I'm going to pour this over the fruit, and I'm going to have a little sip myself. A little bit of sipping sherry. And we're going to stir this. So you can see into my bowl. So it's there's not a lot of fruit in actually one recipe. They're just 3 pieces of fruit, 3 fruits basically. The golden raisins, the currants, and the prunes. So it's a recipe that's pretty high in fiber, and it becomes a very dense pudding. As you'll see in the next few steps when we start making the batter after we've let it steep for a few days. So you can leave this steeping in the sherry for up to perhaps a week. But what you're going to do, you're going to leave it on your counter, and then you're going to cover it with cling film. And so that will keep flies and things away from it, and also preserve it. So we're going to put it out, and every, I would say, a couple of times a day, give it a good stir as well. And as we prepare it for the next step, which will be making the batter and actually steaming the pudding. And so the way it works is it has multi-step process. And so first step, steeping the dried fruit. The second step will make the batter. with some suet and some flour and some spices, similar spices to the ones we use in mincemeat and also in fruitcakes. And then we're going to put it into our pudding basin, and then we're going to steam it for 5 hours. Yes, 5 hours. And then we're going to let it sit and age for about 5 or so weeks until Christmas. Then on Christmas Day, you steam it again in the same pudding basin for about 3 more hours, and then you serve it light with flames, and then pour some hard sauce on it and enjoy it with your Christmas dinner. By that time, it should be nice and dense and very, very, I would say, delicious, with all the flavors coming together, and also the suet, which makes it nice and rich and moist as well. So stay with me and as we wait for step number 2. So we're into step 2 of our plum pudding mixture, and it's stir-up time. And in the last segment, I referred to you to a collect from the Book of Common Prayer for the Sunday next before Advent. Now, Advent, for those of you who don't know, are the 4 weeks of preparation for Christmas in the church's calendar. So the Sunday next before Advent is the Sunday before. So Advent Sunday this year is at the end of November. I believe the Sunday next before Advent is November the 21st. So stir up, we beseech thee, O Lord, the wills of thy faithful people, that they, plenteously bringing forth the fruit of good works, may of thee be plenteously rewarded through Jesus Christ our Lord. Now, nothing there speaks of making Christmas puddings, but it was the cue for English people on that Sunday to start their Christmas puddings, to stir them up and stir up the fruit, and so that gives you about 5 to 6 weeks before Christmas for them to steam and then to age. Then of course we eat them on Christmas Day. So if you remember in the last segment, we had our fruit, and we soaked our fruit in some sherry. So they've been soaking for a few days now, so they're nice and plump and beautiful. And so now it comes time to make the actual pudding batter that's going to hold it all together. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grease our pudding basin. Now, I think some of you might already be aware that this year I commissioned my own pudding basin from La Maison de Poitiers in the Magdalen Islands, Les Îles de la Madeleine, and it's made of pottery. Many of you are familiar with a pudding can, and they're wonderful, they're beautiful, they do a good steam, and they do a good product, and most families would have one. Now this, I thought this year when I commissioned this, I wanted something that I could steam my pudding in. I wanted something I could store my pudding in for the 5 to 6 weeks before Christmas, because it's got a nice heavy cover. And pottery is always good to store things in, and if you're going to store it in a nice cool area. And then of course I wanted something on Christmas Day after you steam it again to use to serve it on. So this cover doubles as a serving platter. And so what you're going to do now, you're going to take your wonderful pudding basin, whatever you have. You might have a bowl, you might have a can, you might even be using an old shortening can from the 1970s. Whatever you have, so you need to grease it. And so that's what I've done so far. And I put a piece of parchment in the bottom of it as well, so just to keep it from sticking. You don't want to take any chances. So we're going to put that aside right now. So as I say, I brought that this summer from Les Maisons du Poitiers in the Magdalen Islands. And so, I ordered it for Christmas. But you know what? You can steam puddings anytime during the year, because I was doing some practice runs with that. When I got it in September, I made a beautiful chocolate pudding and then again an orange pudding a couple of weeks ago, so I steamed them. Now pudding, when I say pudding, I'm not talking about pudding in the North American sense. I'm talking about pudding in the British sense, which is often a cake or something of that regard, a dessert. So what we're going to do now, we're going to stir up our ingredients. We've said our prayers and hopefully it will turn out well. Now this isn't a family recipe. I do have a family recipe for a raisin pudding, but this is not it. This is one that has become a tradition of my house, Oscar Lodge. And so it's a British recipe actually from Nigella Lawson. So it's not mine. And one of the things you should know about using British recipes is the ingredients you have to weigh. They don't come in neat little cups and spoons and tablespoons and teaspoons. They come in weight. And so that makes it a little more complicated, especially North Americans don't tend to have a little scale. So what you should do, I highly recommend getting yourself a digital scale. Helps you, and it's more precise probably as recipes than actually measuring them in cups. So what we're going to do now, we're going to take our flour. So we're going to add our ingredients that are going to make the batter. So we're going to take our flour, and to that I've added a teaspoon of baking powder. So we're going to just sift it into our bowl, mixing bowl. I always like to sift my flour. And there we go. So that's that. We're going to put that away. So it's good to clear your dishes as you use them. To that, we're going to add 125 grams of fresh breadcrumbs. So I've taken real bread, actually. That's real bread put in the food processors, as you can see. So these are not breadcrumbs that are commercial, but you can use commercial ones as well. Now, I have 150 grams of suet. Now, suet is something, a number of people have been asking me, what does suet look like? So suet, when I buy it, suet is not easy to come by. Not every place has it. Grocery stores don't tend to sell it anymore in Canada, and you have to go to often a butcher that butchers his own meat because it's from the beef, and so it's hardened. I keep it in the freezer, and so I've grated it today. But what does it look like? It looks like. Here's the bag it comes in. This is what my butcher just cuts me a piece. When I say I go for a pound, this is what he does. He just puts it in a bag for me, and I keep it in the freezer. So this is what it looks like. You know, it's beigey color, pinky color. So it has to be ground. It's really crumbly. It's not something you're going to use just like that. So you're going to need to grate it. To that, I'm adding 150 grams of muscovado sugar. So this is unrefined brown sugar, and it's not easy to come by in Canada. You often have to go to a British shop to find it, or order it online. So Tate and Lyle often have it. It's muscovado. It's sugar, unrefined sugar that doesn't have the molasses refined out of it. Often brown sugars that we see in North America have been refined and the molasses has been taken out and sometimes put back in to give it a little brown color. So this one is the unrefined. So to that we're going to add a teaspoon of ground cinnamon and a quarter teaspoon of ground cloves. It's going to give it a lovely flavor. The grated zest of 1 lemon. So I've taken that and grated it already. And I should have told you that you should be probably putting your steaming pot, your canning pot on now to get the water hot. So be ready when you put this in. So 3 large eggs in here, so I'm just going to stir these up and break them up. just going to this is going to be a very dense pudding, so don't be worried if you think, oh my gosh, we're lacking liquid here. And then I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of honey. I like the liquid honey, so that's easier to use. But you can use the other kind of honey as well. Give that all a swirl in here. There are lots of flavors going on here. So, and then of course to that we have a cored and grated apple as well. So we're going to add all that together. So get everything all. And now it's time to add our fruit. So get all of the fruit and scrape down the sides with all that wonderful sherry that we put in as well. You don't want to lose any of that flavor. Okay. How's our water coming along? It's starting to get hot. And you should always keep on hand a bit of hot water going, so keep your kettle nearby full and at the ready, because you should probably top up the water about every 20 minutes or so. You're not going to boil it a hard boil, you're going to boil it probably a rolling boil. So I tend to start it on high and then turn it down to medium high and let it steam. You want the water to be midway up the pudding can. And so you don't want it to get into the pudding. And so even though this has a lid, as did the old-fashioned ones that I used before, I always like to cover it with a bit of tin foil as well. And that way you have less of a risk of the actual water getting into your pudding. So this is wonderful. Now, my pudding basin this year is smaller than the one that I had last year, so this might actually give me a little more. I might be able to do 2 with this, because my pudding this year, my pudding basin, as I say, is much smaller. This one is about a 3 pint size. So what you're going to do now, you're going to fill it up with all this lovely flavor, and you're going to press it down hard. So you're noticing it's not liquidy. You don't want it liquidy. It's going to come together. So don't worry about that. You're going to fill it up almost to the top, and you're going to push it down nice and tight. And if you don't have a canning pot, what I suggest that you might do is use a big soup pot or a stock pot. And if you don't have the rack in it, put something probably down at the bottom, a pie tin or something like that, so that your pudding bowl is not right on the bottom of the pot. Now this will expand a little bit because we have baking powder, of course, in it. It's not going to expand an enormous amount, but don't fill it too tight, but push it down so that it... And I do have a little bit of powder left, so I'm going to, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make another little tiny one in another bowl. Often you see British pudding bowls that don't even have a cover on top. So this is what it looks like. So it's pretty dense. It's not going to fall out. You're going to take some greaseproof paper. I use parchment paper. Put it on the top like this. And put your cover on if you have a cover. And added measure, I always add a bit of tin foil around the top. Wrap that around nice and tight. Probably your ears on the video right now you're thinking, oh, why is he making so much noise? So this is just an added measure. It could be that this is pretty tight as it is. So just get a bit of kitchen twine and tie it on just below the lip. Nice and tight. And if you don't have a tray in your canning pot, you might want to make the string a little longer and make yourself a little handle. But I do, thankfully. I have a nice little basket in my canning pot. So there we go. So into the canning pot we go. And so we're going to steam that for 5 hours. Yes, you heard correctly, 5 hours. And then you're going to take off the parchment, take it out, and then you're going to wrap it and put it back in that lovely pottery basin and let it age for 5 to 6 weeks before you serve it again on Christmas Day. And then before you serve it on Christmas Day, you're going to steam it again for 3 hours. Yeah, so that's 8 hours in total. So it's quite a process, but it's worth it. You'll love it. I guarantee you. So here you see into my pot. It's sitting there in water about halfway up the basin. So it's going to steam in that pot for 5 hours. And as I say, about every 20 minutes or so, check the water and top up as you need it, pouring it into the pot. So pour in hot water. So keep your kettle ready. So the pudding has been steaming now for 5 hours, and so we're going to remove it from the heat, and then we're going to open the lid and see how it looks. And so we'll let it cool, and then we'll store it in a larder for the rest of the next few weeks, and we'll steam it again on Christmas Day. So stay tuned for the great reveal. So we're going to first open the cover of the pot. And so you see the pudding basin is there. It's still steaming in the water. So we're going to turn the stove off, and we're going to gently take it out of the pot, and then slowly we'll open the cover and see what it looks like, and then we'll let it cool before we store it away. All right. So let's start the great reveal. I'm just going to undo the string and now it's still quite hot, so we're taking off the foil wrap. I'm just going to use some hot holders when handling this. Oops. Just going to put that there so we don't break it. And so I'm going to take out the parchment paper. Oh wow, it looks delicious. It looks lovely, actually. And so this is what it looks like. And so we're going to let it cool for a little bit. I'm just going to put the cover back on, and we're going to turn it up upside down and let it gently. These pot holders are a little awkward. So let's see what it looks like if we lift it off. So here I'm going to remove this parchment. And so this is exactly what it's supposed to look like. Oops, I better keep my gloves on because it's rather hot. So this is Christmas pudding, plum pudding. So I'm going to let this cool, and then I'm going to put it back into the pudding basin, and it's going to age for about 5 to 6 weeks, and then we're going to steam it again on Christmas Day, and then we'll serve it to our guests for Christmas supper. So success. So I invite you to actually, if you don't have a pudding steamer of your own, I highly recommend these new pudding basins from La Maison du Potier in Les Îles de la Madeleine. As I said, you can steam your pudding in this. You can serve it because the cover turns into a platter, and you can also store it in here as well. So think about it. If you don't have a pudding basin, everybody should have a pudding basin. And so get back to the traditional recipes and serve plum pudding to your guests this Christmas. Now, as I said in the first segment, plum pudding actually doesn't really have plums in it. This particular recipe has prunes, which are dried plums, but over time in the English language, plums, the word plum became a generic expression for dried fruits, so typically raisins. And so, as you saw, most of the fruit in this pudding is actually raisins. So here it is. I'm very pleased with the outcome. And so, as I say, as this sits and ages for 5 to 6 weeks, it all the flavors will meld together and it'll be delicious after you serve it to your guests on Christmas Day, perhaps with a hard sauce, with custard, or with a brown sugar sauce. It depends on what you like to have. But this will be served with a hard sauce and probably with a sprig or two of holly on top. And if all goes well, we might even light it on fire and bring it to the Christmas table that way, as is the custom. So on that note, I'm going to wish you a good night for this segment, and we'll be back again Christmas Day for la suite. As we steam it again. So what you're going to do, you're going to put this back in, and you're going to add a clean piece of parchment paper over top, and just leave it and sit for, as I say, in your larder for 5 to 6 weeks. If you want to use your bowl again to make another pudding, well, what I would suggest you do is wrap this in parchment paper and tin foil, and you can do it that way. Now, if you give this away and the person you're giving it to doesn't have their pudding bowl, maybe you might want to offer the pudding in a pudding bowl as a Christmas present. That's actually a very good Christmas present. And if they don't have a pudding bowl, you can also put this in the oven in tin foil and cook it on Christmas Day instead of steaming it again. So basically you would put it in an oven for probably an hour or so to heat it up. Basically you want to heat it and get all the flavors all working together again. And so you can do it that way as well. But if you're doing it that way, because there's a lot of suet in this, I would suggest that you put it in a pan if you're doing it in the oven on Christmas Day. rather than in the steamer pot again. So anyway, do consider it. Enjoy. And so now it's 5 weeks later, and we've had our pudding in the larder for 5 weeks, and it's been aging. So this is what it looks like. It smells delicious. I don't know if you probably can't smell it, but it looks and smells delicious. So what we're going to do, we're going to take it out of its wrapping, and we're going to put it back in, because now we're going to steam it for another 3 hours. It's been steamed first already for 5 hours, and now we're going to steam it for 3 hours before we serve it. So we're going to put the cover back on, but even though the cover is fairly heavy and somewhat tight, I'm going to, as I always do, err on the side of caution, and I'm going to put some foil on as well before we put it in the pudding steamer. And here we go, some kitchen twine. Tie it in a little knot so that it stays on nice and tight. And of course, the water's been boiling on top of the stove. As you can see, I'm preparing for my guests, so I've got my dinner there. So here it is. It's back in the steaming pot. So it's going to steam for about 3 hours. Now, be careful. Check it every 20 minutes or so to make sure if it might need a top up. So add a bit of water to the steamer. You don't have it on a hard boil, so I've got it on high right now, but I'll turn it down to medium high as it starts to pick up some temperature. So here we are for another 3 hours, and then of course our guests arrive. As you can see from the top of my stove, I've got my soup. It's ready, and so the vegetables are being prepared. And so, do you want to come to my dining room? So here's my table. This is my Christmas table. And so I've got my china out. We have 2 guests coming for dinner this evening. And so we have our finest silver and crystal and china out. And then we're going to be welcoming people. We're having beef Wellington this evening with some not mushroom soup, but some onion soup. And so, of course, and then the star pièce de résistance is going to be the homemade plum pudding. Here's my little creche, my little manger scene, which is out and ready to be celebrating the birth of the Christ child. So if you are doing your Christmas pudding this year, Stir Up Sunday is November the 21st, so that's when we typically start the puddings, and they're ready for Christmas Day at five weeks later. Now, when I serve my Christmas pudding, I like to serve it with some brandy butter. Brandy butter is basically about a half a cup of butter, and you whip it up a lot so it's almost white, and then you add 2 cups of icing sugar, and you beat it, and then of course 4 or 5 tablespoons of brandy, hence brandy butter, and so you just serve it on top. Or some people serve it with fresh cream, or some even with custard. So however you want to eat it, it's up to you. So we'll be back when my guests arrive and to show you the pièce de résistance. And so here it is. We have the famous Oscar Lodge Christmas pudding, and we've just put the flames on it, and so now we're about to serve it. So we have some hard sauce to serve it with, and so bon appétit. And to all of you,
Happy Christmas from Oscar Lodge.
and